In this week's Shiurim in Shariat Talmud, we were working in Kiddushin Daf Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara laid out the possibility of ain't kesef l'adon hazeh, but yesh kesef l'adon acher. Maybe you'll potentially say that the father can get the money when he marries off his daughter from a nara, and we learn it from an inference, from a diuk. The Gemara rejects that possibility and says maybe really the money should go to her. I'll say that the money goes to her. So then the Gemara has a svara. Wait a second. Is it possible that the father has the ability to makabel the Kiddushin, like it's written in the pasuk, that's BT, Natati isha zeh, my daughter that I gave to this man? You see clearly that a man can give over his daughter to another man. And is it possible that he has the rights and she gets the money? That can't be. So then I'll say, no, I'll reject it. Simple reading in the Gemara, which Tosfos is going to reject, is Ema Hadim Animilid Katana. I'll say that the verse is talking about when she was a Katana. Of course, he can marry off his daughter when it's Katana. Delay Sleyad, she doesn't have a hand in order to accept the Kiddushin. Avana'ara, but a young girl at 12 and a half, between 12 and 12 and a half. Delay Sleyad, that she has a hand because really she gets all the Maisiyadea. She really can work and receive her money at that point. She doesn't have to give it over to her father. So then I'll say, let her marry herself. The Gemara Kiddushin, let her marry herself, and let her take the kesef. So where do we learn now that the father really gets the money when he marries off his daughter as an ar? We can't seem to be learning from the diuk. Must be we learn from a different pasuk. It comes along in the Gemara and says, Amakra, Ba'nareya beis haviha, a young girl in her father's house. Kol shevach niurim lavia, all the profit that she makes goes to the father. That will include the money that she gets for the wedding. So if a father marries off his daughter who's an ara, so we can learn from the pasuk that the father gets the money. Later, the Gemara wants to come on different possibilities where we can learn the fact that the father gets the money when the girl's in the ara. Maybe we can learn from Faras Nadarim because we see that the father can still mafia the neder. He can take away the nadarim, the vows of the girl. He has power over that girl to take away her nadarim. He has the rights to do such a thing. So maybe you'll say from there you'll learn he also has the rights to get the money for the kesef. The Gemara answers, no, you can't learn from there. Why can't you learn from there? Because mammon miyisurim lo yafinin. We can't learn the din of mammon, which is the din of Kiddushin, from the din of Isser, which has to do with nadarim. The two different categories. One is money and one is Isser. You can't learn one from the other. So the Gemara continues later on and says, the ki temanila from Boshes Bagam. Maybe you can learn from Boshes Bagam. What is Boshes Bagam? We know that if a girl gets raped, it's not only the kanas, not only the fine goes to the father, but even the Boshes Pagam, the fact that she was embarrassed and she had a Pagam, that money also goes to the father. So the Gemara answers, no, Shani Boshes Pagam, Davua de Shaykh Bagavahu. The father is Shaykh to the Boshes Pagam. There's two Peshatim, one's going to be like Rashi, and one's going to be like Tosfos HaRosh. We'll discuss it later. Tosfos V'Kitema now has a difficulty. He doesn't understand the possibility of the Gemara that we want to learn the din that the father will get the money when she's in Na'ara from the din of Boshes Bagam, the fact that he gets Boshes Bagam in the rape case. How can we learn from the other? Why? Because it appears the Gemara in Kesuba says the only way we know that the father does get the Boshes Bagam is because he can marry his daughter to a manuva or a muchen shkin, either to an evil person or to an ugly person. Rashi explains that loss, why is that a loss? Because really before she was raped, he had the ability to marry off to these kind of people, and he would have got more money. After she was raped, she went down in value, therefore he took that loss. So you see, he would get the money of Boshes Bagam from the fact that he can marry off to one of these kind of people. But wait a second, how do we know that he can marry off to one of these people? We need to know that fact before. We need to know that he's allowed to marry off his daughter. He has rights to marry off his daughter when she's in Na'ara. In order for us to learn that the Boshes Bagam will go to him when it's in Na'ara, so that's a stira. Our Gemara seems to be wanting to learn that he can marry her off from Boshes Bagam. But Boshes Bagam can't be learned until we already know that he can marry her off. That's a contradiction. So Tosfos' first answer is no. We don't really need to know the fact that he can marry her off when she's in Na'ara. All we need to know is that she is married when she's in Na'ara. In other words, we can say, well, since he has the potential to marry off to a muchen shkin when she's a katana, when she's a young girl, and that will continue into the fact that she's in Na'ara, that's enough to tell us that he'll still get the Boshes and Bagam in the case of rape, even when she's in Na'ara. Because since he had rights to marry her when she was a katana to a manuva or a muchen shkin, so that Pagam, that thing still continues, and that gives him the right of the Boshes of Pagam. Tosfos has a difficulty with that answer, though, because he says it doesn't make any sense. Because if that's the svar, that he can marry when she's a katana, and the bosh of the bagam, the busha, continues until she's a na'ara, well, then it should also continue when she was a bulgaris. That would mean that even if she got raped as a bulgaris, as a full-fledged woman, he would still get the money. That's not true. That's a fact. So it can't be that svar. But maybe we can answer, no, bulgaris is not like na'aris. That's a line of demarcation. Maybe you'll say there's a major difference between a full-fledged girl and a na'ara. And I'll bring you a proof from Hafar Sadarim. Wait a minute. We just said that you can't learn from Hafar Sadarim the din of Kiddushin. No. Some things you can learn and some things you can't learn. I'll bring a proof of Hafar Sadarim that's the difference between a bulgaris and an na'ara. That doesn't mean that I have to learn the din of Kiddushin from Hafar Sadarim because it's Isser. We saw that there was a difference between Isser and Mammon. We can't learn. But we can learn there's a difference between a bulgaris and a na'ara. What's the proof? The proof is the Kal V'chomer on the next daf. The Gemara says on 4a, if simanim, if two hairs, which cannot take a girl out from the father, can take her out of the reshus of a master. In other words, the girl is a slave, so there's a slave girl. So once she reaches the point where she has two hairs, she goes out from her master, but she doesn't go out from her father. Her father still has rights to marry her off. Surely age, which is a bulgaris, surely once she reaches age, which can take her out of the house of her father, can take her out of the slave master's house. So Tosfos wants to say, well, how do we know that she goes out of the reshus of her father from age once she reaches 12 and a half? Where do we know that from? Must be, we know that from Hafar Sadarim, because we have that chilik over there. Basically, he's saying hekrak rekut. He's saying that since there's no other better answer, it must be we're learning from Hafar Sadarim that there's a difference between a bulgaris and a na'ara. Therefore, maybe you'll say that's far that we said earlier, that if he marries her off as a katana, and it continues into na'aris, that's enough to teach us that he gets the boshet and the pagam. And we don't need to know that he can marry off as a na'ara, which is not a steer between the two Gemaras anymore, because you don't need to know that fact in order to produce the din of boshet pagam. Still, that's far we're not continuing to bulgaris, because there's a major chilik, there's a major difference between a bulgaris and na'ara, like we just saw from Hafar Sadarim and the Kal V'chomer on Daf 4a. But Tosfos rejects this possibility. He says that chilik does not apply. Just because there's a general chilik between a bulgaris and na'ara in terms of Hafar Sadarim, that doesn't take away the original svara. The original svara was, why B'klal does the father get the mammon of boshes pagam in the case of rape? Is because he took a loss. So he took a loss when she was a katana, he took a loss when she's a nara, and he took the same loss when she is a bulgaris. There's no difference between any of them. So the svara, even though you say there was a chilik in general between a bulgaris and a nara, it wouldn't apply here. Therefore, Tosfos was to give a second answer to our original question. Our original question is, how is it possible to learn from Boshes Pagam that a man can marry off his daughter as a na'ara and receive the money if Boshes Pagam itself needs that fact in order to produce it, the father receives the money? In other words, we need to know that he can marry off to a munuv or a munuch hashchin. We have to know that already. So how could that be the source that he can marry her off? Therefore, Tosfos wants to change around the Gemara a little bit. When the Gemara deflected the proof that the father has the rights over the daughter by stating we're dealing with a katana, but by a na'ara she can marry herself, it didn't come to exclude that the father can also marry her off. Therefore, the verse is still teaching us that the father has rights to marry off a na'ara. So we have a source. Even to a muchen shchin, we know that we have a source. We know that the father can marry off his daughter. Therefore, we can learn Boshes Pagam from it. Our Gemara is attempting to learn something else. Our Gemara wants to know, what if she marries herself off? The question will be, does the father get the money or not? The verse is still teaching that the father can marry her off. The question will be, where she marries herself off. Therefore, there's no contradiction between the two Gemaras, because the Gemara in Kesubos already has a source that knows that you can marry off, a father can marry off a nara. And the question of our Gemara is a different question. So Tosfos has an unstated difficulty now, which is, wait a second, if that's true, why do we have to go on to Boshes Pagam? Just learn from the fact that the father can marry her off and he gets the money. Learn from there that if she would marry herself off, the father should get the money. The answer is no, we can't. We have to come on to Boshes Pagam. It's only after we know from Boshes Pagam where the father received the money, even though he didn't have any involvement, that we have a havamina that even though she did the marriage, that maybe you'll say that the father gets the money. In other words, the case where the father married her off, well, he did the maisa, he receives the money, okay. But I can't learn from a case where she did everything. only after I Bosh Bagam, where I saw that the money came from the outside, from the rape, that in such a case the father gets the money, that I would have a Havamina, that she would marry herself off, that maybe that the father would get the money. The Tosfos Rosh wants to give a third answer to the difficulty. He wants to say that our Gemara doesn't hold by the Gemara in Kesubos. The Gemara in Kesubos said that Bosh Bagamar learned from the fact that the father can marry off to Muchen Shchin. And Rashi brought to our Gemara the same Svara. But the Tosfos Rosh says that our Gemara doesn't hold by that Gemara. Our Gemara over here says Einochinami, that the reason why we can't learn from Bosh Bagam is because the father is associated with the Bosh Bagam, but the explanation is different. He's associated in the sense that he's also embarrassed. He's also embarrassed when she gets raped. So therefore Einochinami, he should get the Boshes and Bagam. But not because he can marry to a Muchen Shchin like Gemara Kesuba says. Therefore we've disassociated the two Gemaras.